Hey everybody, cherry blossoms are one of my favorite things to paint in the springtime. They're bright, colorful, and so delicate, perfect for painting with watercolor. Let's paint. One of the things I like best about cherry blossoms is the fact that they're so delicate, but that very delicacy that they have is something that can be really, really challenging if you allow yourself to get too distracted too soon by all that detail. So what I like to do is I like to just block in a nice big overall shape of the blossoms and the way that they're sitting there on the paper. Okay, so I'm not painting the individual ones. What I'm doing is just giving myself a nice big block in of some light pink tone. And I happen to be using a little bit of some Winsor red to do this. Winsor red is a nice warm red. If you prefer a cool red, you could use alizarin crimson. I have some of that as well. I'll probably use some of that in the shadows. I always like to have some contrast between warms and cools in addition to the contrast of all the values. So you can see the way that I'm putting the paint down on the paper, and it's a really nice, very, very light wash. I'm just sort of moving the brush gesturally, trying to make the same sort of movements that I see from these little petals themselves without painting individual ones. Notice I'm not going like this and going like this and filling things in. Instead, I'm using my entire brush to just get big, big shapes, big areas all covered up, okay? So let's continue to do a little bit more of that as we move this way. I've got a cat under the table. Oh well, that's okay. Okay, so let's just get a little bit more of some of these blocked in that are up at the front here. And then we're going to be ready to start working with some of the other aspects of this little branch. Okay, so all of this is wet, and before I can do any shading or anything in there, I need to give that a few minutes to dry. So while it's doing that, I can move over and sort of move into this area where we have some of the branches. Okay, so I'm going to get some of that blocked in just a minute. So down here we have where the branch connects up. It can bleed a little bit with what's there. That'll just give us a nice sort of natural transition from flowers into branches. I don't mind that at all. But I don't want to put a lot of darks down in here just yet, because what'll happen is that'll all start to run and then it'll just get messy. It could turn muddy, and we don't want it to be muddy. So we're going to avoid that area for right now. Okay, now let's just see. We've got some really, really nice darks in here. And I'm going to let that just sort of trail downwards on the paper, same way that it does over here. And the next thing that we'll do is to add a little bit of that beautiful shadow that we see underneath there, because what that's going to do is that's going to really, really help to start to lift things up off the page. Okay, I can start to get a little bit of some of this darkness in here. If that runs just a tiny bit, that's okay. I just don't want to have it be so much of a bleed that it all runs together. Okay, and we can get a little bit of it in here. You can even see I left some whites of the paper showing, which is nice. That'll help to just give some depth behind those little petals there. Okay, so now I'm going to get sort of a grayish blue tone going for that nice shadow that we see. Now I've got two shadows sort of because I've got a couple of different light sources. I'm just going to go with one right underneath this nice block in that I have there of the, not really a stem, but it's like the little branch. I'm going to let that come up to here, and then I'm going to just pop these guys off the page a little bit more by putting in a bit of shadow, excuse me, underneath. Okay, there we go. And as I get close to those petals, I'm going to get even a little teeny tiny bit darker, because what I want to do is I want to make sure that that shadow does its job and pops the blossoms off the page. There we go. We can get a little bit of that in here. That's also going to help to just lift that central part of it off the page. And as we move away from the object itself, you know what happens? The shadows sort of fade out a little bit. Okay, whoops. There we go. And I want to get a little bit more in here just to really give that a nice sort of grounded look. I can cut in, I can use this also to cut in and out of some of these edges here. Now that that paint is a little bit dry, that pink paint that I put down earlier, it's okay to do that. It's okay to touch it. Okay, there we go. So now we've got our big overall shape of the blossoms lifting up off the page thanks to that shadow, and we've got this nice connection back here with our stem, which I just want to get that to be a tiny bit darker in a couple of places, right? So if I put some shadow on the bottom part of it, that's going to make it just really look like it's got some nice light hitting it. Now some of these little branch-like things, they actually have a really nice amount of red in them. So I'm going to add a little bit of that to some of the ones that are up here. And that's going to not only inject a little bit more color, but it's going to give things a little bit more depth. And we've also got some places where back in here and in here, it's almost like there's little bits of red that just sort of fade into the lighter pink blossoms themselves. Okay, down in here, there's a few of these little things that are past their prime. So we're going to give those a little bit more of a sort of a brownish, just adding a little bit of yellow into this, sort of almost like a yellow ochre, raw sienna sort of a look to them, so that we know that some of them are past their prime there. Okay, we can add a couple of those in there. That just also helps to add a little bit of color variation and texture. We can use some of that color for some stems as well. We'll get a little bit more of that into here. Okay. Yeah, there's quite a bit of that happening over in this area. I also am seeing some really pretty greens, and the pink and the green together, really pretty combination. So we're going to get some of that going as well. Okay, I see quite a bit of that up in here. We've got some leaves, so we're going to just put those in, and some stems as well. Put some few more stems in this area. Down in here, we've got stems as well. A little bit coming up through here. You can also use those greens to sort of paint around and carve out the suggestion of some of those individual petals. Okay, that's coming along nicely. All right, now one of the last things I want to do is I want to get sort of a warm, a reddish toned shadow. Okay, because not all of these petals are that nice pale pink. Some of them they're a little darker. They're casting shadows sort of on themselves. So I just want to get a slightly cooler tone, but still with a pinkish look to it. And I want to put some of that down, looking at the overall shapes of these. Again, not going so much for individual petals. I want to just make sure that we can tell that there are places where some petals cast shadows on others. Some of them come forward, some of them recede. And if we really pay attention to that, that'll tell our viewers, whoever's looking at this, that we really were not just randomly making petal shapes, but really looking at the way that the light was hitting this and at the way that it was casting shadows on itself, and really letting the light carve out those different petal shapes. Okay, as you know, if you do too much detail, you can end up flattening things out. So remember, let the overall shadows of the light and the way it's hitting your subject, no matter what it is, if it's a subject that has a lot of detail, let that detail be sort of secondary to the overall shapes and shadows of whatever it is that you happen to be painting. Okay, a couple of last little things that I want to do. First, I want to get in there on those shadows that are underneath this You know how watercolor sometimes dries a little bit on the light side? Well, that's happened here. So I want to go back in, and right where we get right up close to those petals themselves, I just want to darken some of that up. Okay, and then the other thing that I want to do is just make sure that the petals, not the petals, the stems that move through here, that we've got enough darks, you know, a few of these dark shapes. You always want to have a nice sort of a continuous flow of darks. It doesn't literally have to be such that the darks touch one another, but you want to have a path that your eye can follow to sort of lead you through your composition, your subject, right? So if we get that, that will really help to tie everything together and make it nice and fluid. And I'm going to call this done. Well, that was fun. No matter what time of year it is, you can always find some interesting things to paint if you just look outside. And if you like this video, remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.